Hello, welcome to Coffee and Propaganda. I have a new name for the show. I am Duncan King. I've changed the name, I guess, in an effort to make the show seem a little more mature. And also, Coffee and Bullshit doesn't really fit my personality because I really don't cuss much. And I guess the title would also be a little more family friendly. More people would more likely to click on it. And I also decided propaganda is a more rare word than bullshit for people to use these days. So propaganda, coffee and propaganda, I think would show up a little easier on searches if you were trying to look for the show. I actually think as far as the attractiveness or the coolness of coffee and propaganda versus coffee and bullshit, I think they're kind of equal. Coffee and propaganda, I think that's kind of a cool name too. So I decided to change it. In the process of doing this show over the many episodes, I'm going to develop some things I think work better, and there'll be changes made along the way. My 0 users aren't going to be upset by any changes because anyone who does end up watching this will be watching it way after it aired anyway, and they'll already be used to the name Coffee and Propaganda by then, so it'll be fine. This episode, we are continuing with our analysis of the carm.org website. Carm.org is a website set up by Matt Slick, who is a famous apologist. The name CARM stands for Christian Apologetics Research Ministry. It is a website which offers apologetics, which are explanations for or defenses of the Bible, and also of Christianity, or ways to attempt to prove that Christianity is true to people, which is what apologetics does. And I already said that. I'm a little tired today. Today we are continuing our analysis of the Bible difficulty section of the carm.org website, and namely dealing with the book of Exodus. In the previous episode, we went over the book of Exodus on the carm.org website, and every single issue that Matt Slick brought up, I felt most of them were kind of softball. So like we did with the book of Genesis in the carm.org website, we are going to go into the book of Exodus and deal with issues, more serious problems with the book of Exodus that Matt Slick did not mention in his list of Bible difficulties. So we are not actually going to peruse the actual website this time. We're going to go outside of it because we're going to be talking about some problems that the website did not mention. The first such issue I would like to discuss is, let's see here. The word Moses, the name Moses, does not actually mean pulled from the water. In the book of Exodus, the name they give for Moses, they say that the origin of Moses by the woman who pulled him out of the water and found him means pulled from the water, which is also supposed to reflect Moses pulling the Hebrew people, or carrying them across the water, or leading them across the Red Sea. We led them across later. And according to the book of Exodus, that name is an Egyptian name, which would make sense in the narrative because he was raised as an Egyptian. Problem, it's not an Egyptian name. You're going to find a whole lot. The actual name as it is found in the Hebrew Bible is Moshe, which etymologically, the way it sounds, it is Hebrew. There are a lot of really weird explanations for, well, it's obviously not an Egyptian name. Maybe it really was this. And it kind of evolved later to be Moshe. So there's been all kinds of really weird Christian attempts to try to make sense of the fact that his name is so Hebrew sounding. Easy explanation, it's a Hebrew name. The name literally means savior, the name Moshe, and it fits with the scholarly consensus about the patriarch stories and the story of Moses in the Torah, that these originally began as campfire tales. the name was not so much a personal name when it was told in these versions of the tales, but he was just called the Savior. So once upon a time, the Savior took the Israelites across the Red Sea, and the Savior went to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go," etc. And then over the years, they began to say that Savior was actually his name, and they came up with this wild idea that the the priestly caste put into the actual text, saying that the name was Egyptian to try to make sense of it. But the name is a Hebrew name, and it means Savior. This invalidates the entire narrative. It's not possible that any of the story is true if the name Moshe is a Hebrew name. Because the woman who pulled him from the water, the priestess, or the princess who pulled him from the water, would not have given him a Hebrew name. It wouldn't have worked. If she had given him a Hebrew name, then everybody would have known that the baby was Hebrew, and he would have been killed like all the other Hebrew children were killed in the massacre of the children led by Pharaoh at the time. Another issue we have, let's go on to the next thing. This is from the Skeptic's Annotated Bible, and this is a more serious contradiction that we find in the book of book of Exodus, which Matt Slick did not mention. And that issue is, come on, darn it. All right, come on. There we go. And this is how many generations from Abraham to Moses. In Genesis 15:16, I believe God is speaking to Sarai here. And he tells her, in the fourth generation they shall come hither again. And this is often used as reference. Well, it obviously seems to be a reference to the Egyptian people. Let's go to Genesis 15 to see that in context. Genesis 15. Lord's covenant with Abraham. And that specific passage was, where'd I go? 16. Okay. And as the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and a thick, dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at the good old age. In the fourth generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." So he says it's going to be 4 generations that they're between him and them. Now here it's obviously more than 4 in the actual narrative. You have Abraham, then you have Isaac, then you have Jacob. Then Jacob begets Levi. Well, that's Leah's children through Jacob. One is Levi. And then here it says that the sons of Levi, or one of them was Kohath. And the sons of Kohath included Amram. And then the sons of Amram included Moses. So you have 1. If we're not including Abraham, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Including Abraham, that would be 7. So that's a pretty bad contradiction there. Here is an issue that deals with Exodus 12:37, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. There were 600,000 men, and this is a pretty serious issue. Assuming there were 2.5 million people marching 10 abreast. Come on, author, guy who puts this website together. I'm sure you're in a rush, but you can spell things right. Marching 10 abreast with a space of 1 meter between rows, the line would have been 250 kilometers long. It would have required 5 days to pass by any fixed point. And there's all kinds of issues here in the Hebrew Bible where Moses gathers these 2.5 million people to chat with them. Pretty crazy. Can't do that without a microphone. I remember the WrestleMania 3 was held at Madison Square Garden. I'm sorry, not Madison Square Garden. Yep. Nope, the Silverdome. It was held, WrestleMania 3. That was 98,000 people. Imagine trying to communicate with 98,000 people without like a PA system set up. That couldn't be done. Picturing that building. This was 2 million. So that would have been 20 times that number. Here is a, let me look at here. I dealt with this a little later. We find it in Wikipedia. Lists numbers and logistics as an issue. According to Exodus 12, 37 through 38, the Israelites numbered about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, plus many non-Israelites and livestock. Numbers 146 gives a more precise total of 603,550 men aged 20 and up. Now, if you consider that number in any given population, we can kind of estimate how many the total number was, because we know how many any given population will have men that age and up. And so by thinking of that, you can pretty much figure out how many it was total. And the total would have been about 2.5 million. It's difficult to reconcile the idea of 600,000 Israeli fighting men with the information that the Israelites were afraid of the Philistines and Egyptians. These 600,000 plus wives, children, and elderly, and the mixed multitude of non-Israelites would have numbered some 2 million people. Marching abreast and without accounting for livestock, they would have formed a line 150 miles long. The entire Egyptian population of 1250, which we know about also from external evidence, is estimated to have been around 3 to 3.5 million. This is the entire country we're speaking of. This is not all the ones that were just concentrated in this area where the Israelites lived. This is the entire population of Egypt at the time. And no evidence was found that Egypt ever suffered the democratic and economic catastrophes as the loss of population would represent, nor the Sinai Desert ever hosted these millions of people and their herds. Some have rationalized the numbers into smaller figures, for example, reading the Hebrew as 600 families rather than 600,000 men, but all such solutions have their own sets of problems. And I'm not going to have time to go into that today, as I really didn't research it. I guess I have to assume that the author of this article knows about how they all have their own sets of problems. Well, anyway, okay, this 3 to 3.5 million is the Egyptians in the entire country. And the 2 million Israelites would have been just in one area. So obviously these 3.5 million Egyptians weren't just guarding that one area where the Israelites were. They were spread out over the country. They couldn't have dedicated their entire society toward bossing these slaves around. Obviously they lived all over. And this would have meant that the entire population of Egypt would have been just concentrated in this one place where the Israelites were. But no, they were spread out all over the place. When you have, now obviously in this day and age, maybe you could have a population of maybe 2 million people control another population of 2 million people of similar numbers. It'd be very difficult, but back then you have an issue, we don't have guns. So any population of 2 million people could overthrow another population of 2 million people. I'm calling this 2 million because I'm being very generous there, because obviously the entire population of Egypt wouldn't have just been where the Israelites were. Countries of 2 million people fight countries of 3.5 million all the time. They wouldn't have been afraid of them. 600,000 fighting men is an army. That's a pretty darn impressive army for that day and age. And I guess the Israelites, whoever wrote the Torah, just didn't realize what populations of countries were back in that day. 2 million people was probably more similar to actually their population at the time they were writing it. The population of the kingdoms of Israel at that time that they were writing these was probably about 2 to 4 million. And so they believed that, well, back in 1500 BCE, well, they didn't have that day in their minds because we invented the BCE dates later, but well, it would have been approximately 700 years before the person wrote about it. He would have thought that populations of countries were similar to the populations in his time, and they just simply weren't. So the pirate population in that time, in 1250 BCE, would have been about 3 to 3.5 million people. They wouldn't have been able to hold the Israelites. I extracted this from a site. Professor of Ancient, this is about the archaeology, and this is kind of a summary. Professor of Ancient Archaeology and Ancient History and Archaeology, Eric C. Klein, also summarizes the scholarly consensus in his book, Biblical Archaeology. A very short introduction published by Oxford University Press in winter of the 2011 Biblical Archaeology Society's best popular book on archaeology. Despite attempts by a number of biblical archaeologists and an even larger number of amateur enthusiasts over the years, credible direct archaeological evidence for the Exodus has yet to be found. While it can be argued that such evidence would be difficult to find, since nomads generally do not leave behind permanent installations, archaeologists have discovered and excavated nomadic emplacements from other periods in the Sinai Desert. So if there were archaeological remains to be found from the Exodus, one would have expected them to be found by now. And yet thus far, there is no trace of the biblical 600,000 men on foot, besides children, plus a mixed crowd and livestock in great numbers. Exodus 12:37-38, who wandered for 40 years in the desert. So we would expect to find this evidence. Now, obviously, when you're saying that you can't find evidence of something, doesn't mean it's not true. But it is an issue when it's a situation where you would expect to find evidence. And this is a situation where we'd expect. This is the passage he's referencing here. Now the sons of Israel journeys from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. A mixed multitude also went from them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. Exodus 12:37-38. There would have been some kind of evidence, because they found evidence from other societies in the Sinai Desert, the very region where they were supposed to have gone. And this is a massive, massive exodus of people. And they're apparently, according to the book, they were there for 40 years, which is another issue. It wouldn't have taken them 40 years to travel that distance. I was earlier trying to put the numbers into Google Maps, but I was having issues there. Apparently Google Maps doesn't recommend one try to walk from Egypt to Jerusalem. I don't know why. Well, at least in the path I was trying to put into the numbers, put into the website. This is the path that, according to the Bible, and there's some dispute on this, on the actual path they took. But somewhat like this, this is the land of Goshen. So they traveled down here, traveled through here. A lot of them think this was the crossing, and a lot of other people think this was the crossing. There's kind of, you can't figure out. It just says the Red Sea. Some people think that meant the Reed Sea. But regardless, I'm not even sure where the Reed Sea is. We're kind of, wherever the Reed Sea is, they think it was a place that dried up by now anyway. And it wouldn't have been impressive enough. The Reed Sea at the time would not have been an impressive enough river to have drowned the entire Egyptian army after they'd passed through it. And with the Red Sea, you have the opposite problem. We'll get to that in a second. But this is the route they would have taken, according to this individual who wrote this. And I looked at several maps of the route of the Exodus, and they're mostly similar to this. Some of them have them coming over here. And you got to go here because this is where Sinai is. This is where, obviously, where in the story Moses gets the 10 Commandments. So they got to go here at some point. It's the only way the story works. And then they end up over here. So this little route here. Anyway, most people will say when you put these numbers in, this does not take 40 years to traverse. I mean, how long did well, I don't know how to put that in. The route of Lewis and Clark, I don't think it took it didn't take no 40 years for that to happen. I mean, it's obviously some distance to walk, especially for a large group of people, but it would not have taken 40 years. I had trouble trying to get the numbers. I could have waited and broadcasted this later after I'd found the numbers, but I decided I'm going to go on the air every day, no matter what kind of position I'm in. But you can figure out the math yourself. It wouldn't have taken 40 years. Archaeology of sites named. The Book of Numbers gives a list of sites at which the Hebrews allegedly settled in Sinai and its immediate surroundings during the Exodus. Of these sites, a select few can be pinpointed relatively well by description and deduction. Two of such sites are the biblical Kadesh Barnea, modern Ain Kaitis, and Ezion Geber on the Israelite side of the border between Israel and Jordan. Just outside Eilat, both sites have been investigated archaeologically and found to have been founded during the ancient Near Eastern Late Iron Age, no earlier than 700 to 800 BCE, with the obvious exception of early Neolithic nomadic activity. So the Book of Numbers gives lists of the places that the Israelites went to on their trip, and they didn't exist yet. So we have a similar issue here that we find in the New Testament and the Gospels when they talk about the city of Nazareth, which didn't exist when Jesus was alive. And we'll get to that when we get to the Gospels. But so, yeah, we have places on this journey that didn't exist at the time. Pretty big problem for the Exodus account. However, many of not most of the places mentioned in the Exodus did not exist within the same chronological period as one another. So not exist at the time, but not in the same period as each other. Pithom and Ramses, the two treasure cities claiming to be built by the Hebrews, never existed at the same time. Pithom did not exist as a significant settlement before the 26th dynasty. Prior to this, the settlement was known as Tikhenu and was still referred to as such in the Ptolemaic period. It was an obscure garrison town which mainly, if not exclusively, served as a way station for Egyptian expeditions. Even in its enlarged Roman state, the town barely registered as either Egyptian or Greco-Roman accounts. Per Ramses, the local residence of the Ramsades was abandoned at the end of the New Kingdom centuries later. Another example is the Exodus portrayal of Edom. Edom was not yet a nation. In fact, the region wasn't even inhabited yet. The place where the Hebrews stopped at wasn't even built until 800 BCE. Again, put this in perspective. The Israelites, where did I actually Christians put up for this period? The Israelites traveled this region about the year, or the Exodus occurred around the year 1200 BCE. And some will give it as far back as the year 1500 BCE. And at that time, obviously these sites didn't exist. These towns didn't exist at that time. They existed way later. So that one's would be estimated rare recurrent dating by Thomas LeVay. The previous estimates have been placed some 300 years later. And the main excavating sites have been dated between 8th and 6th centuries BCE. However, the Exodus could have occurred and still be biblically accurate as in the 13th century BCE, meaning that if radiocarbon dating is contested, the settlements would be estimated to be between the 12th and 13th century BCE, thus additionally slamming the window of opportunity for Exodus to have taken place. Here is an image. These are the cities in question. Pithom. These cities did not exist at the time that the Exodus is supposed to have happened. Another issue is the Passover. And I've done a lot of look at this issue, getting in preparation for this, because I hadn't heard this issue before as I was researching. Obviously a pretty serious issue. Passover has nothing to do with the story in Exodus. That's where it came from. Passover is from a Canaanite festival to celebrate the yearly death of Baal. Let's look at add a link anyway, so it's fine. The Canaanite god, rain god, was Baal. He's mentioned in the Bible time and time again, but no details are given about the myths associated with him. To learn about these, we must consult the library found in Ugarit, an ancient Canaanite city on the Mediterranean coast of modern-day Syria. There we find, written in a language very close to Hebrew, detailed accounts of the mythology and religion of Canaan. Among them is a story which explains why the rain stops each spring and returns every fall. The Canaanite god of death, Mot, kills Baal each year anew. Baal spends his summers in the netherworld Sheol until being resurrected again in the fall. It was who this is actually from the text here that we're getting from this Canaanite inscription. Who confronted mightiest Baal, I who made him a lamb, like a kid in the breach of my windpipe. Mot tells Baal's sister Anath in the poem describing this myth. Mot's likening Baal's killing to eating livestock may be key to understanding the original symbolism of Passover. Perhaps by eating a kid or lamb, the Israelites were symbolically recreating Mot's consumption of Baal, hoping this would stop the rain in time. So basically another issue here is that this tradition, this Passover tradition, would actually predates the supposed time of the Exodus. And it had nothing to do with any trip from Egypt to Canaan. The Israelites took the holiday, the celebration, and made it their own by adding their own little myth to it. I didn't give a link here, but I talked about that a little bit. The trip to Egypt to Canaan, what it's like in a few weeks. According to all the Egyptian records, the Egyptians suffered no setbacks in any of the periods named. All the dates put forward by advocates of the history of Exodus fail to correspond to any period of national chaos or collapse in Egypt, as one would clearly be expected by such a series of disasters. Usher's 1491 BCE date corresponds with a time of ambitious Egyptian expansion. The reign of Hatshepsut. This is a really weird name. But anyway, it doesn't look anything like Moshe, does it? Look at the kind of name that they would have, Moshe is an Egyptian name. This is the kind of names they had in Egypt. Hatshepsut was stable, peaceful, and saw extensive construction projects and trading missions. This is known from actual material remains as well as Egyptian records. Her successor, Thutmose III, took Egypt to its greatest imperial extent, forging an empire from the Euphrates to the fourth and possibly the fifth cataract. These are not signs of a nation that just a few years before, had lost its entire harvest, its drinkable water, its army, and its sons. There is no archaeological evidence at all of mass death and impoverishment in the early New Kingdom period. The same holds true for the period of Ramses II. Though there were a few brief reigns after Merimta. Again, these names don't resemble Moshe. It's a totally different kind of name. And what appears to have been an attempt to interfere with the line of succession, the Chancellor Bay affair. There was no evidence of a national catastrophe. Not long after, during the reign of Ramses III, the state was still able to construct numerous massive monuments, such as Benetet Habu and the Temple of Ramses III within the Karnak complex, and mount effective military campaigns in both land and sea. Now, a little bit more about this issue of the New Kingdom period. This is the period that supposedly this all happened. And what actually was going on in Egypt in the New Kingdom period? What was the world actually looking like during this period? This is what it looked like. This is where the Egyptians were during the period that this Exodus is supposed to have taken place. This is the New Kingdom period. So here's another issue. You have, according to the story, let's see here. Here's my map of the travels. So they go from here, go up to here, and this is where they end up. Where was Egypt during this time? Where they were going. So you could not have fled the Egyptian Empire by going to Canaan. Egypt was already in Canaan. They occupied this area during the time, which also renders the story impossible. The Hebrews, priestly caste who put the story together, did not know the history. Would they? The world did not have libraries at the time. There was no way for countries to share their histories. Histories are quickly forgotten in a period without literature. And here we go. And so they don't remember, didn't know that actually Egypt occupied this area. And a lot of people think, and I'm of the opinion too, that the actual idea of that the Jews believed that they escaped the Egyptians was a political escape. Because the Egyptians occupied this area, and over time, they became free of them politically by not being under their rule of the empire. And this morphed, as a lot of word-of-mouth tales do. They morph, they evolve over time into the story that they were literally in Egypt. It makes a heck of a lot of sense, don't it, folks? Heck of a lot of sense. They were once captive by the Egyptian empire. They became free, and this evolved into a story that they were literally in Egypt, literally slaves there. We know that the actual literal slave story doesn't make sense. We know that this must have happened because the Egyptians actually occupied this land. And eventually it wasn't occupied. So they did become politically free from them. And this evolved into the story about the Savior. Well, who freed us from the Egyptians when we were slaves? After the story had already evolved into the story of the slaves. Oh, it was the Savior that freed us. And then that evolves into the story about, oh, he was put in a basket and all this stuff. Now, okay, this is what I was going to show you earlier. It just didn't just didn't turn into a link when I post it in here. This is the Million Man March. Now, this is not 1 million people. Million Man March, we actually found out, was actually 400,000 people. People did count. But this is what 400,000 people look like when they're kind of in one place. How wide this is, how spread out these people are. The Israelites would have been traveling 2.5 million people. So it would have been roughly 5 times this many that you're looking at here, all traveling together. And they would have been all cramped up like this. That'd have been, you can't even walk. You can't march when you're cramped up like this. They would have been spread out. They probably would have been spread out almost like, think about that wide or longer, all marching together across the desert. They leave no evidence that they had been there. And besides this, there's livestock you got to think about. They're taking livestock with them. They're taking all kinds of goods that they'd sold from the Egyptians with them. It would have been ridiculous. It had been the most ridiculous migration the world had ever seen of a group of people. 2.5 million. Just think about that. Think about what that would look like. And let's see here. Oh, this is what I was bringing up before. This is the actual timelines. And then, so this is the actual timeline from Egypt to Canaan. This is given to us by Christians. This is not given to us by some secular people trying to disprove the Bible. This is what Egyptians come up. This is the Bible timeline. It's a website by Christians. It's saying that Moses' life was between 15 to 1400 BC. And this is the actual state of the region at the time. 1500 to 1100 BCE. This is what it actually looked like. They would have been going back to Egypt. They would have been leaving Egypt, going over here, going back into Egyptian territory. So how could they be leaving Egypt? And these Canaanites, supposedly, they went here and just slaughtered these Canaanites and took over here. The Canaanites were not controlling this region at the time. The region was being controlled by the Egyptian Empire. So it just wouldn't have worked. Let's go to another issue. Here's the how big the Red Sea was. According to a map produced by British Admiralty, while a short distance from to both North and South Sea is over 900 meters deep, opposite Nuweiba, it is a mere 765 meters deep. Even if some mechanism could be suggested to produce a channel through which such a depth of water, sending hundreds of thousands or millions of people of all ages, plus accompanying animals down steep cliffs and coral drop-offs that typify the Gulf of Aqaba, then at the other side is clearly infeasible. Now what we're talking about is this is the actual Gulf that Christian apologists say that was crossed by the Hebrews. The Gulf of Aqaba. This is the Gulf of Suez. Gulf of Aqaba would be the smallest thing you could traverse that would be considered by some people to be the Red Sea. And so the story they have there is that they traverse this. Now the issue here is that it's so deep. It's a lot deeper than the author thought it was. We're talking about 900 meters deep. So think about a 900 meter drop off, and it's not a slow incline, it's a drop off. If you were looking at that 900 meters drop off, carrying all these people, carrying children, carrying, anybody would have, even if you divided the water there, part of the sea, and tried to cross it, it still would be freaking ridiculous. And the earth would have, your legs would have just sunk right into the earth there. If you just suddenly take the water away, it's going to be like quicksand. Apologists wish to defend the history of Exodus, but without the burden of absolute implausibility of Moses, having parted the Red Sea, described above, instead seek to direct us toward the Sea of Reeds explanation, arguing for an unfortunate mistranslation of the otherwise divinely proofread Bible. People have trouble with biblical miracles, including stupendous ones, like parting the waters of the Red Sea. So far, it probably didn't happen that way at all. Probably they didn't cross the 50, 60, 70 mile wide Red Sea. They crossed the Sea of Reeds, or the Reed Sea. Now you get a good north wind on a good offshore breeze, or so it will dry up the land. This is a quote from a gentleman, and I'm sorry I did not put his name in this quote. But the quote is from the show Bullshit with Penn and Teller. There was a scholar who said that. And I should have put his name in this quote, but I didn't do this. But here's your issue, okay? If you, so basically, according to him, they crossed a dried up marsh. I mean, how impressive is that? And it does not really work with what happened to the Egyptians. According to the story, the Egyptians went in there and they were all drowned. So crossing the Reed Sea really doesn't kill the Egyptians. If you get a north wind pushing the sea back, it just wouldn't do the job. It wouldn't kill them. Another issue I always have with the Exodus, and all the stories, including the stories of Abram and his encounters with Pharaoh, and Joseph and his encounters with a Pharaoh, is that they never call him anything but Pharaoh. And this causes a lot of historical problems. People are always trying to figure out what Pharaoh was he talking about. But if they really encountered this guy and they really lived in an era where they're familiar with the culture, they wouldn't have just called him Pharaoh. It would have been Ramses or whatever the hell he was. And over again, you see in the text, Pharaoh, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Another problem I have with the narrative is the slaves owning cattle. What kind of slaves are those? In the story, the Israelites have their own cattle, and they're supposedly slaves. Now, is the 10 Commandments is a good list of 10? We're getting now into the second half of Exodus. First half of Exodus mostly deals with the actual Exodus. And then the second half kind of deals with the laws. So let's go into that a little bit, the second half of the laws. Let's go to the actual 10 Commandments. This is a good list of 10. If you came up with a list of 10, what would you come up with? How encompassing is this list of 10? I brought the language, thou shalt know gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not take the Lord of thy God, the name of the Lord thy God in vain. So these are just religious things. Remember the Sabbath. That's religious. And 4 laws that are just telling you religious stuff. And these 3 are kind of, they deal with the same thing. Just honor God over any other gods. I mean, all I had to say, you have to put these all into different ones. Honor thy father and thy mother, thou shalt not kill, commit adultery, steal. Those are all decent ones. Thou shalt not bear false witness. This means, basically don't commit perjury, slander against someone. Thou shalt not covet. That's it. There's so many things not covered here. And there's so many things that would be covered here that are kind of stupid to cover. Now, adultery includes basically any kind of premarital sex. But is any kind of premarital sex really equal in its violation? Obviously, fucking a little kid is much worse than just having some wild sex out in the field with somebody you met, with somebody you're in love with, but you're not married. Because there's degrees of how bad adultery would be. And it's all treating them equally. So that's kind of a stupid way to put the 10 together. There's no covering of rape, really. I mean, if you could rape your wife under this, that'd be fine. You can keep a slave here. You can be prejudiced according to this. You don't have to respect anyone's democratic rights according to this. Not listed anywhere. There's nothing here that would tell you to not be prejudiced. There's nothing here that would tell you to not spit in somebody's face if you don't like them. Nothing really there. So I made a list of 10 as an experiment one time to see if I can come up with a better comprehensive list of 10. I think my list covers a lot more things than the 10 Commandments does. A lot more mores compiled into a list of 10. And it's actually kind of a trick to do that. But if I did it better, you'd be the judge. If I did it better, then I guess I'm a pretty more clever person than the author of Exodus. Which should be impossible because I'm not a god. My first 10 commandment is always put your children first. That's a good one. You don't find that anywhere in the original 10 commandments. The road to 10 commandments is opposite of that. Honor your father and your mother. I say put your children first. You honor your children, and them honoring you will usually be just taken care of. Put your children first. You brought your children into the world, didn't you? They didn't ask to be put in the world, brought into the world. You brought them into the world. So you should put them first. I think it's a better moral. Believe nothing without sufficient evidence or sound argument. Consider no idea above criticism. Discourage ignorance, but do not hate, mistreat, or disrespect the ignorant. That's a pretty good one. You find anything in this 10 Commandments as wise as that? I don't think so. It basically contradicts all these. But we know from managing our societies that we should consider everything. We should question almost everything. Anything we can question. We can't question everything. There are some things that are just certainties, and you're not able to question them. But you should try to question anything you can. Know that your status is a pretty good one. Number 3, the 10 Suggestions by Reverend Duncan King. It was me and not God coming up with these commandments, even though I'm not God. Know that your status as human being supersedes all other statuses. When considering yourself, categorizing yourself or others, consider no identifying trait, whether it be ancestry, nationality, gender, religion, ideology, personality, sexual orientation, lifestyle, class, or anything else ahead of the identity of being human. Treat others with the same level of dignity, respect, and courtesy that you would desire to receive. I think that's a pretty darn good commandment there, or suggestion. Pretty darn good suggestion by this totally non-divine person was able to come up with. So this covers prejudice. This covers discrimination. This covers any way we'd want to treat people. This covers religious tolerance. Covers homophobia. Sexism. Put nothing ahead in your way of viewing yourself and trying to split lines between you and someone else out of being human. Pretty darn good suggestion by myself. Is there anything in this 10 Commandments that even equals this? Thou shalt not kill. You can still beat the shit out of people. Doesn't tell you anything to respect anybody else here. You know, bear false witness against them. We can be prejudiced according to this. Doesn't cover it. My 4th suggestion, defend the rights of all people to make choices, as long as those choices do not limit the ability of others to make choices. This is the entire basis of the United States concept of freedom. You can do anything you want in your life, make choices, or you allow anybody else to make choices, as long as they don't limit the choices of others, such as violence does that. Tyranny does that. Stepping on someone's lawn does that, or without their permission. Taking someone's property does that. So you can make choices as long as those choices do not limit the ability of others to make choices. Pretty darn good one. Basically the basis of the entire legal code. Can't get that in this 10 Commandments. Can't get anything in here about respecting people's choices, respecting people's lifestyle decisions. Not anywhere here. Follow this, you're not going to be respecting anybody's lifestyle decisions. Number 5, never engage in an act of human violence or do anything to another person's body without the person's consent, except to defend against violence, and then only do what is necessary to stop the attack, never beyond that. Never engage in behavior that has a high risk of harming others. So this covers violence. It covers risky behavior that could harm people. These are the sort of things that people sue each other over. Covers all that. Pretty good rule. And it also kind of follows a lot of the codes of martial artists. You only use violence to defend yourself. Anything in this 10 Commandments that kind of covers that? Nothing in here about violence. Don't kill, that's it. Other than that, you can basically go punch people in the face all you want. Happy slapping's totally fine according to this. Doesn't cover it. I'm still restricted. I got 10. The author of this had 10. I'm covering a heck of a lot more things than he's covering. 6, never tempt a child to do something against the child's own interests. That's a pretty darn good one. It covers a lot of stuff there. It covers child molestation. That covers underage sex. That covers selling children cigarettes. It covers selling children drugs, giving children beer. It covers a whole lot of stuff. Can't find anything in here about that. Fucking kids is just as bad as having sex with someone you love before marriage, according to this one. Which doesn't make it that big of a deal, honestly, if you're going to treat those two things the same. But what it says here that you need to treat your kids well. What says here that you can't beat the crap out of your kids. Piss on them, throw them in a ditch, whatever. It's not brought up here. Beat them half to death. Doesn't say anything about that here. You got to honor you, but you got to honor them. Never allow an animal to suffer. That's a pretty good one. Obviously, we eat meat. But do we allow them to suffer? Do we cut the, cut the leg off the cow and let it just sit there and writhe in pain as long as possible? Hopefully we don't in the slaughterhouses. I'm sure it happens, but certainly against American ethics to do that. We wouldn't like that. We wouldn't go out when you have a creature suffering and dying. You put it out of its misery. That's an ethic. You do the same thing with any kind of creature. If you can relieve its pain, you do whatever you can to do that. Can't find anything in here about that. And I got the same amount of things to do. I got the same amount of commandments to make. I got 10. I'm covering so many things you're not covering here. This is supposed to be God doing this. How can I do it better than he is? Never steal. Same thing. Wow. Okay, I got one just like yours. I still had room for it too. 9, never deceive a sexual partner into believing you have amorous feelings or monogamous tendencies you do not possess. That's a pretty good rule to follow. It covers a lot of stuff that we do with partners. Cheating. Don't deceive them to think you have monogamous tendencies. I'm okay with people going out and having sex as long as they aren't deceptive about it. As long as they don't try to think someone that they love them and then they go cheat on them. If you're cheating on your husband or your wife, that's kind of you're deceiving them into thinking you have tendencies you don't possess. And you don't really love them. So this covers basically, this is a pretty good rule of thumb for all kind of relationships, the way you should treat somebody that you're in a relationship with. Never deceive a sexual partner into believing you have amorous feelings or monogamous tendencies you do not possess. This is one that's I'm not that in love with number 10. And a lot of people do dispute this one. Christians who try to debunk my 10 suggestions, they'll always go right for this one, which I think is poorly worded. But I'm just going to say what I wrote here. I probably should change it. But it says, never become more wealthy than an average person. If you receive extra wealth, use it to help people less fortunate. I guess I probably should say, I always want to change it to, never become more wealthy than you need. And if you can give money, give money. Because obviously average person, what are we calling average? Average by American standards, average by world standards, average by what standards here? So that's one I'm not that in love with. And a lot of people try to debunk my 10 suggestions. That's a stupid one. Average person. If I'm someone any richer than the average person, which would be like, what? $8 grand a year. If you go by people in Ethiopia and all the poor countries, that'd be like what it would be. So that one should be reworded. But anyway, it's a pretty darn better list of 10 than all these. And the substance behind this is pretty good. When if you have too much, you have more than you need, give it some away. You don't need 20 houses. You don't need a big yacht. You don't need all that fucking shit. If people are poor and starving, you should give some of that away. You should help people out less fortunate than you. It's a pretty good ethic to follow. And this was all come up by a simple little human being living in the 21st century, who is myself, and I don't claim to be a god. And you're claiming that that a god came up with these. How could I come up with a better list than a god did? Kind of funny how that happened. And Slick talked about slavery, and I didn't get on him enough about that. I was a little annoyed, if we remember the last episode of Coffee and Propaganda. But here's some more verses where the Bible outright condones it. Oops. These are the rules that you shall be set before them when you buy a Hebrew slave. You shall serve 6 years. So this is an actual rule coming from God here. You read the previous statements here leading up to this statement. It says God is handing these down. According to Matt Slick, God he just allowed slavery because, sometimes he allows things that he doesn't tolerate. He's setting up rules about slavery here. He shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he should go free for nothing. If he becomes single, he should go out single. If he becomes married, then his wife should go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, wife and children should be masters, and he shall go out alone. Though the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. Then his master should bring him up to God, and he should bring him to the door of the doorpost, and his master should bore his ear through it all, and he should be a slave forever. This is obviously, Christians will bring us up. Okay, well, the slaves were only kept for 7 years, and they were left free. This is all for Hebrews. Foreign slaves didn't have this kind of options. But even then, you could trick him to keeping him as a slave as if he gets married. He has a choice to either continue to be your slave or ditch his wife. Otherwise, the choice is either stay your slave forever or leave his wife and kids if he made any wife and kids in that meantime. If he leaves you, then he don't get to take his wife and children with his. Wife and children should be the masters. Pretty shitty system. But anyway, God's given these rules according to the Bible. Pretty ridiculous. And here's another issue I have with these rules of slavery. In Exodus, he's given these rules right after the Israelites were slaves. They travel over to Mount Sinai from Egypt, and suddenly he gives them these rules about having slaves. These people wouldn't have been slaves to each other yet. They were just then slaves to another country. So how are there people that are rich and people that are poor already? How did that happen in the time that they traveled from Goshen into Mount Sinai? Were there already people that had amassed fortunes in that period of time and poor people that needed to become slaves in that period of time? So they were all slaves just a little bit ago, and now they're owning each other. So how do these rules apply to them in this situation? You couldn't have been owning each other already. That's ridiculous. Here's a passage that kind of deals with abortion. If men strive, this is one I didn't even know about. I guess when I originally read Exodus, I passed this over, but it was kind of interesting when I ran into it, researching for this episode. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished according to the woman's husband will lay upon him. So the woman's husband, like if a guy actually deliberately hurts a woman, and the child in her womb dies, the husband will come up with some kind of punishment, and he shall be the judge's determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. So basically I kind of cut this short, but what basically is happening here, if he only dies, if you beat up a woman and her baby dies, you only die if you did this before. And nobody had an issue with it. And it's only give life for life. No, so that your fruit part, yet no mischief follow. I think mischief, yeah, that she dies, or there's rape or something like that. No mischief follow. So it's only considering it life for life if it's a woman's life. The baby isn't considered a life in this. So the Bible is actually disagreeing with a lot of pro-life people here. They're not calling, in this passage, it differentiates between lives of adults, human beings, and lives of children in wombs. It's not calling them a life here. It's only calling adult people lives. And there's a lot of passages here I mentioned here that don't seem to apply to the current situation of the slaves. It's talking about issues like lands that they live on, having wines and things like that. If you make perfumes, they're in the desert. How does it apply to their current situation? Because obviously these seems to be the laws that Israelites from 500 BCE were coming up with and putting back in that time period to say, well, they were handed down to Moses. But if you're actually looking at the situation, the narrative that's depicted, they don't seem applicable to slaves that had just left, their masters and were traveling in the desert. What does that have to do with your lands or whatever? You don't have lands yet. You're in the desert. Really weird passage I ran into here. So I don't know what the hell is going on here. The thing I kind of glanced over when I read this originally. And when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai the first time, and they're worshiping the golden calf, and they're dancing around naked, and he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. So he burns it, then he grinds it to powder, and then he makes them all drink it. And they just did it. That's kind of weird. I guess we will. You drink this and you like it. Kind of a weird thing. Drink this gold, you fuckers. And they all just kind of drank it. I don't know why someone didn't just say, fuck you, I'm not drinking that. And it had been a pretty big calf if he fed it to all the Israelites. 2.5 million of them made them drink the calf. So he does that, and then God gives him a plague, and then he does this whole grinding thing, and then after that, he has some of the men kill 3,000 of the men, and then there's a plague after that. Boy, I don't know which punishment was good enough. There's one, and the golden calf story is also weird in the sense that these people had seen God part a Red Sea. They had seen all these plagues, They were walking through the desert, and God was a fire by night and a cloud by day. So how could they doubt him enough to have this calf story? Nobody in that situation, if they actually had seen this God actually traveling in front of them in this big cloud and parting seas and stuff. We need to worship a calf and make this calf because we need to worship any God we want. They already know the truth. God's right in front of them. So that's kind of the weird part of that. You're making that golden calf. That always seemed weird to me. And that's all for now. Obviously, this episode was a little sloppy. It's okay. I reserve the right to be sloppy sometimes. If I got prepared to the level that probably would have been necessary to deliver this episode in a nice, clean-cut way, then it would have taken me too long, and I wouldn't have been able to go on air in time. And I promise to be on air every day. But I hope you bore with me this time. A little bit of sloppiness here. It's okay. And I went a kind of a longer time than I expected, which is also okay. But anyway, I'm going to go through probably later and cut the video down. Some parts where I was kind of looking around for stuff. Whatever. I make mistakes. I learn. I move on. But anyway, thanks for watching, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of this, whatever this is. And watch me tomorrow for some more coffee and bullshit around this time, around 7:30, 8 o'clock. We'll be back on the air tomorrow. And sayonara.